Hello and welcome to a Building Smart webinar. Thank you for joining. My name is Ra Twilly and I will be your moderator today. Today's webinar is titled How Being Open Creates Value. Our speaker is Håvard Brekke, founder and CSO at Catenda, and Håvard is also a BSI fellow, so it's great to have you presenting today. The webinar is scheduled to last 45 minutes with a short Q&A at the end. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available for replay on our website. I'd like to remind you that your phone lines will remain muted for the duration of this webinar. If you have any questions or wish to make comments, please use the chat function located within the control panel. I would also like to bring to your attention that Building Smart is committed to ensuring participation in the development of standards is unrestricted, and the process for their adoption is transparent, and standards that are developed do not favor any particular provider and are open, non-binding, and accessible to all. Please take note of our antitrust code of conduct. Now, I would like to hand over to Håvard.
Thank you very much, Ra, for introducing me. Looking forward to this webinar. So I'm going to share my screen and see if I can get there as well. Here we go. Today's topic is about how being open creates value. So doing or having an open attitude and having an open approach to your projects, to your business, how can that possibly create some value for you and everyone else? I'm really grateful to Building Smart International for hosting this webinar. So thank you so much for the opportunity of talking. And I'll be going through the topics and sharing my thoughts on this. And towards the end, I'll be happy to discuss whatever topics comes to mind from the listeners. First, a little bit about myself. I work as CSO for Catenda, a company that I helped found together with 4 other colleagues in 2009. We build an open CDE platform, and also we have tools for the site and tools for the operations and maintenance, all based on an open BIM-based platform. A typical SaaS software. I live in Oslo in Norway. I have a PhD from Tokyo University, and I lived in Japan for about 7 years. After doing my stint in Japan and working there as a software developer for a while, I started working at SINTEF, which is the largest independent research organization in Scandinavia. And this was in 2004, and that was exactly when Norway started to build their open BIM strategy, in a sense. So it's very exciting times. A lot of organizations came together to collaborate and work together to help Norway use BIM and utilize the open BIM tools in all the projects. So very exciting times. And in 2009, we realized there was a commercial potential here, so we started Catenda. But let's start with the real interesting stuff. This is a picture that every time I see it brings me to awe. I feel the perspective here is very interesting. It's called the pale blue dot. And if you look closely, you can see Earth in a ray of sunshine or ray of sunlight from the sun. This kind of shows us how small we are in the vast universe and how important it is to work together on this small place that we inhabit. Because everything you see in this picture contains everything you know, every people you've ever known, every single piece of history of the human race has happened on this pale blue dot in the big vastness of space. So it's worth for us to preserve the planet that we're living on. There are great efforts to bring us to a multi-planetary species, First step is probably the moon, then Mars, and so forth. But it's going to take a while, and we need to preserve what we have. And that is the reason for Catenda's existence. We would like to help bring the AECO industry into a 100% sustainable situation, which means that everything we do in our industry is sustainable to every extent. So we're not scraping or taking resources from the earth. We're just using what we have and giving back exactly as much as we take. This is a formidable task, and we need help from everyone, of course, to get there. But that's our end goal, and that's why we exist. And it's more real than we might think. I like this story for many reasons, but this picture was taken by a colleague of mine when he was at a conference in Florida in the US. So it's taken from his hotel room when he arrived. And the conference was, everything was going as planned. Everybody was there ready to engage the next day in all kinds of interesting talks. And this picture was taken by his mother from her TV the next day. He lives in Oregon, and obviously his mother was a little bit concerned that he was there. Thankfully, he got away. Everybody was evacuated and got home safely. But it shows us that the climate changes that are happening are closer to home than we perhaps would like. There are many people who have experienced a lot of interesting things and catastrophic stuff this summer. So it's important to pay attention to it. It's important to do what we can to fix it. There is another thing happening with our sort of species at the moment. A younger generation is always coming into play, of course, as the older generation gets older. New kids are born all the time. And the younger generation today is a lot more grown up with a lot more sharing, a lot more communication, a lot more connectivity than ever before in our history. Now this generation brings with them a very interesting force, which is to share everything. So they share whatever they ate this morning. I have a 14-year-old son who constantly is on Snapchat sharing something with his friends. So this sharing attitude is built in the coming generation, and is going to have some interesting impact. I believe that these two things is a force that drives everyone towards a more open attitude. I think at least the ones I've spoken to so far have an intuitive sense that an open attitude is a good thing. There's something powerful about the open attitude, something powerful about the openness and doing something open that I think we all feel and share. Now there are other things that can be associated with being open that may not be as nice in a sense, but in general, I think there is a genuine intuition around the openness that is a force for good. I think we all feel that. This guy, Don Tapscott, is a Canadian, very interesting guy. He's written a lot of books and done a lot of speaking. This is from one of his appearances at TED, a very interesting talk that I recommend everyone to see. But he lays out sort of like a theory that he says that the global change in climate and the young generation, those are two driving forces. One is pushing us and the other one is pulling us into becoming more open, and having organizations that are more open, having attitudes, societies, processes, everything goes towards the openness. For example, climate change, if we're not having international scientists researching, understanding, and sharing among them everything they know, it's a lot more difficult and more challenging to understand what's actually going on and how we can potentially stop it. I think this is an interesting idea. There is also 4 principles of openness that he lays out in his talk that I think are very fitting. So if you think of openness, what are the 4 principles that kind of covers this and lays beyond the open or below the openness? And I'm going to go through them one by one. So one is collaboration. So the idea here is that openness kind of foster a more collaborative environment. You collaborate more with your peers, with other organizations, even competitors. So when, for example, Norway decided to implement OpenBIM in the construction industry, there were a lot of competitors that came together to collaborate on making this work. So, for example, different general contractors were all together trying to figure out what's the best way of doing this and utilizing this interesting new technology, a new way of working. So it fostered a very nice collaborative environment, and that brought a lot of value. An example from a real world is this guy, Rob McEwen, who was a banker. I think he was working for Merrill Lynch. And then he decided to do something totally different, which is to become a miner. So he bought what he thought was a gold mine and started to explore the potential of it and ended up not finding anything. So he had spent a lot of millions of dollars to buy this huge mine, but he couldn't find any gold in it. And of course, he had a lot of data. That was usually or typically a very sort of proprietary setting for all miners, where they have a lot of data about the ground, where they think they might find gold ores, etc., etc. And nobody in the mining community ever shared that with anyone. That was a proprietary, well-guarded secret. What's the data and the geological sort of data about my mine? Well, this guy had no mining experience, so he had a more open mind, if you will, and were able to come up with the idea of sharing that data, publicizing it on his homepage, and saying to publicly saying that, you know, whomever could find a way for us to find gold in our mine would be rewarded with $500 million. So he shared megabytes of data and allowed anyone to download it, and whomever could come up with a good idea or a good way to find more gold would be paid. So what happens is that typically people from more 3D engineering world and data scientists poured over the data and came up with a way to navigate and actually 3D visualize the whole ground, and managed to find where the gold was. And he went down there and you know, started exploring and started excavating, and ended up getting a $10 billion paycheck or payday from the gold that he found. So using a collaborative way of working, sharing the data, paying, of course, for the work, but getting many, many more times back. An interesting story where you see that collaboration really generates value. Another sort of pillar of openness is transparency. You know, having a more visibility into what you're doing. And Zappos, an online store for mainly selling shoes, got known for their customer success or customer success support. Was very good. What they do is they have vendors get insight to their own business. So how they're doing, how much they're making, what's going on every quarter to quarter. They share that with their vendors, allowing the vendors to better plan, better execute, better prepare for whatever is coming in the future. So they're openly and being very transparent with their vendors and collaborative partners. They're doing the same with their potential customers. So they're inviting whomever wants to into their headquarters, and they train whomever wants to, and they have Q&A sessions for people who are interested in what's going on with their business. So they're very openly, very sharing, very transparent in terms of how they run their business. And it works. It's a successful online shoe shop. The third pillar of openness is sharing. So if it means that it's better to share things than not to share things, of course, and it encourages more sharing than not if you have an open attitude. An example from the real world again is IBM, who when the open source operating system called Linux, which now drives every single Android phone out there. It drives a lot of the internet servers that you visit when you go online. I'm betting that Facebook or Meta, Snapchat, Slack, what have you, all these are using a lot of Linux servers, Linux-based servers. I know for a fact that Catenda Hub and all our software services are running on Linux. So that was a big, powerful system that was openly made through open source and an online community. But one of the commercial entities in this space had a lot of interest in Linux. So what they did was they shared $400 million worth of source code that was, fixes. It was a porting of the source code to run on different kind of hardware. It was added benefits for bigger servers, for real-time servers, etc., etc. So source code that IBM had spent $400 million developing, they shared it freely with the world. But what happens is that what they got back in terms of all the community source code that was around Linux and Linux itself was worth several $billion for IBM. So by sharing what they had, they got back many times what they shared. So sharing is highly valuable. The fourth and final sort of principle of openness is empowerment. So if you have better access to knowledge, which we today have through online access of open universities, free web pages that have tons of knowledge, YouTube movies telling you how to do things, empowers everyone. And another real world example of this was what happened after the earthquake of Haiti I believe in 2010. Volunteers after the earthquake quickly built maps to empower helpers that were their rescuers to be more effective. So they're using OpenStreetMap to add on where there were refugee camps, where there were people missing, where there were dangers, where there were this, where there were that, whatever was needed for the volunteers and the helpers to move around and help more effectively was done. So this massive volunteer effort that was happening from everywhere in the world really empowered all the helpers and rescue workers to more efficiently help and rescue people in this catastrophe. So again, an open sort of attitude and open way of thinking creates a lot of value and is very, very helpful in terms of moving the world forward. buildingSMART is an international organization that in many ways manifests a lot of these principles. And as an example of this, buildingSMART International is very collaborative. So if you contribute somehow into buildingSMART International by helping design some standards or what have you, it's a very collaborative environment. Everybody shares, everybody helps each other. People from all walks of life, all kinds of background, usually in our AECOO industry, but still different backgrounds, different sort of experiences, all help and collaborate. It's a very transparent organization. Everybody shares whatever they have been working on. You can have access to everything that's going on. Everything's published. There's an open forum. There are a lot of the processes are using GitHub, for example. Documents are shared. So you have insight and access to everything that's going on, all the elections, to whom has, is doing whatever in whatever committee or room or what have you. Everything is transparent and available for everyone to see. The organization is also, of course, willing to share everything. All these standards are published and shared online, free to use by anyone who wants to. All the sort of the reports of the next step, all the interim milestones being done by all the processes or standards development are shared, so you can follow everything. Nobody's afraid of sharing what they found, sharing this or that to help move everything forward. And finally, all these standards that buildingSMART International are developing is really empowering you to work better in your field of work in our industry. The IFC standard, Industry Foundation Classes, is one of the standards in the world that are most or being implemented most by software. There are a lot of software out there that has implemented support for the IFC standard. Obviously, most of the big BIM authoring tools that you use to design whatever bridge, road, or building that you're working on has support for the IFC standard to export that data into an open format that can be shared and used and read by everyone else. There are other standards in there that buildingSMART International has shared and is being used. So this empowers you and helps you. And I remember when Norway started using this in 2004, it was obvious for everyone involved how valuable this was and how much it could empower the users and the projects to use the better tools. Previously, a lot of projects in Norway were locked into a certain vendor, so you had to use tools from that vendor. And obviously, that is not exactly encouraging innovation. When one vendor has the whole power of all the processes going on, you will not see a lot of innovation. But if you have competition, you will also see innovation. So opening up that format and the sharing of data helped spur a lot of innovation in the industry in terms of workflows and usage of BIM. You can see the same with the internet. Internet is based on an open protocol, open standards on how you share. Anyone can connect their own computer to the internet and share whatever they want to share. And that has spurred an enormous amount of innovation for everyone. So the connectivity and the availability of communication that we experience today and the availability of knowledge and data is incredible and is owed to the openness of the initial internet. I also want to touch a little bit about what being open is not. For example, when people started sharing music online, there was a movement called Pirate Bay. It's still there, which wanted to share all the music or videos or what have you for free. Now, obviously, the ones who are spending a lot of money to create this music didn't think that was a good idea, in particular the ones holding the copyrights. So there was a big fight here, but obviously there was something in between that now is available for us. We still have to pay for music, but it's much more readily accessible than it ever was. But Pirate Bay helped push music into a more convenient format for us. But being open is not about everything should be free. Not at all. Being open is not being a zealot about it. So everything has to be free and everything has to be open and nothing can be behind closed bars or whatever, or paywalls or what have you. That's not the case either. And all data must be free at any cost. No, it does not. There are a lot of data that cannot be shared openly. There are many business reasons within a project where you want to keep some data and information for yourself. And there are contractual reasons for why you should not share some data. So all this, of course, must be part of the open attitude, that you are allowed to not share everything. You're allowed to close some data off for whatever reason. And you also need to focus on security. It's important to secure certain data from public access. Some buildings are very sensitive to because of high value targets or whatever that uses the building. So it's important to take all the necessary precautions to keep that data safe. Having said that, I think it's important in terms of security of a building that you have to secure the building thinking that all the data about the building is available to whomever wants to. So if you secure your building properly with that in mind, I think you'll get the better secured building than if you believe that the data is not available for everyone and is secured based on that. So there's a distinction there. But coming back to the four sort of pillars or principles: collaboration, transparency, sharing, and empowerment. These are still valid, even though you can keep your data closed if you need to. You can keep some information away from others, etc. This is still the principles, the four principles that drives openness, and that I think we all should implement in our business, in our organizations, in our processes, in our projects. Let's look at one example that is close to home. This example I want to bring up is called BCF. I personally believe the name should be maybe changed. It's not the best name, BIM collaboration format. But that's the initial idea was based on BIM workflows. So it's natural that the name came up, and it's sort of been there forever, and now everybody knows it by the name, so that it makes sense. But the BIM collaboration format is mostly about, first of all, it works for all workflows. So it's a communication standard. It allows you to communicate and set up workflows between different stakeholders in a project. And it's not just about BIM. Even though it says BIM collaboration format in its name, it has ability to communicate anything, even though it has nothing to do with BIM. And that's important to know. It's a basic communication protocol, a basic communication standard that works for any workflow in any project. It is also very easy to implement. And I can say this because Katenda is a software developer. I've been a software developer myself for a long time. And it's not a difficult or complex standard to implement. It's very easy to do. So there is no excuse from nobody that has not implemented support for this. There is no excuse. And the reason is, I think it's highly valuable. So I said it's all about communication. It's about allowing you to share something with another peer in your project, another stakeholder. It's about communicating an idea, communicating an issue, pointing something out, making clear what a decision was made and why, sharing a request for information, an RFI, sharing a change order, sharing a task that needs to be done, sharing some work package that needs to be taken care of in a certain time. all this is possible with the BIM collaboration format, this communication standard, communication protocol that is available. And it is two parts. It is both a way to sort of, in a software, define all the issues and topics that you want to communicate and share, download it as a file in a standardized format, and sending that file to another software that can import that file and see exactly the same thing as you saw. It is also a protocol that can work between servers or between software systems. So you can write your issues and topics and the stuff that you want to share, RFIs or whatever, and then automatically that can be synced to another software using a set of application programming interfaces that are standardized from buildingSMART International. So a client can implement one time support for that standard, and it should work with all the other BIM collaboration format servers out there. So one typical example of this being in a very BIM centric workflow where you have used, for example, a quality checking tool like Solibri to check whether or not two different models, the electrical model or the structural domain model, if they can, if they have any collisions and any sort of design flaws between them that they need to fix. Solibri can list all the problems there and communicate that to an open CDE seamlessly. So you work inside Solibri, you do whatever you need to do to check and find everything out. Once you have all the issues, it's seamlessly synchronized into the open CDE and shared with everyone in the project. This works seamlessly. And if every software vendor out there had implemented this, you could have tools that worked on your mobile phone on site, and you could very quickly communicate something and it will be shared by everyone or all the relevant parties or what have you through an open standardized communication platform. So it enhances collaboration. It's transparent. You can share things very easily, and it empowers everyone in the project. So let's look at that. So because the BIM collaboration format makes it easy to communicate, it fosters much better collaboration. And once you have better collaboration, you have a more smooth project and you have less errors and you have a cheaper project with more higher quality that has less delays. So the BIM collaboration format brings easy communication into your project. It's very easy, very efficient. So efficient access to communication fosters more transparency. So if everyone has access to most of the communication going on, that's transparency. Then everyone can see what happens. Everyone has access to the decisions made. Everyone can see the challenges being done here or there. And everyone can understand and contribute because it's transparent and open, and a lot less problems will continue too long and be too expensive. So efficient access to communication, which BIM collaboration format helps to do, brings more transparency. And having a clear communication fosters more sharing. So once you have a clear communication, it encourages more sharing of things that you think about or you want to share in your project, which again is a principle of openness and creates a lot of value as we have seen. So one example of how BIM collaboration format brings a much clearer communication is that the BIM collaboration format has in it a way to say that you're looking at a certain point in a 3D model. So the viewpoint that you have can be communicated through this open standard. And once you have that viewpoint, you can also share some images and what have you, but then it's easy to kind of annotate the viewpoint with some red coloring or whatever and highlight things that you want to say. You know, you have to move this pillar a little bit to the left because it interferes with something else. Or this elevator shaft needs to be wider because I cannot fit all my cables in there. So we need to do something with that. And that becomes much clearer through the BIM collaboration format. So for example, an engineer can discover that let's say the elevator shaft is a little bit too narrow. So he can communicate that through the architect and say, we need more space here, and I suggest moving the left-hand side, 50 centimeters or whatever wider. And that particular communication with the viewpoint of the model, with the highlights and pictures to explain everything, all that can be seen inside the architect's own BIM authoring tool. So he doesn't have to leave his tool of choice. He can just get everything inside that, and he can click a button or whatever, and the model that in his tool will open at the right place. This is a very powerful way of communicating and makes sharing very easy in any project. And finally, once you have all this in place, more communication empowers everyone in the project. You have a lot more clarity of what's going on in your project. You can see all the tasks that are outstanding. You can see who is delayed, who needs help, where is the project, where are the critical factors, the critical stuff that we need to make sure never gets delayed, how can we follow up. Everything is clear, and you empower the whole project to deliver better and faster things. So that's pretty much what I wanted to share today. Just to repeat, so the 4 principles of openness is collaboration, sharing, transparency, and empowerment. I would like to hear everyone who disagrees with this and thinks this is a lot of dumb things, and do not think we need openness in our industry. But I leave it with that. Thank you so much for listening so far. And we're open for any questions or comments or reflections around this that you may have.
Thank you very much, Håvard. I think that's given us a lot of food for thought, a lot of things for people to think about. And just while I let our attendees put any questions together, what do you think the general attitude is towards how close the industry is to seeing both the value financially for being more open in the way they work, and how that also translates with the sustainability objective that you talked about at the beginning, seeing those both hand in hand, and where we're at now with that, and what perhaps we could be doing in the next few years, say?
That's a long and complicated question, and I'm sure I have answers to all that. But I do think that most of our industry understands the power of the openness in a sense. I think most of us kind of understands that if we communicate more efficiently, things becomes a little bit better. And sharing, having access to data makes it easier to make good decisions that are environmentally friendly and so forth. So I think there is a general sort of feeling that, this makes sense, let's do this. I think the complication is that we have a lot of history, tradition, and there are a lot of organizations involved. There's a fragmented industry where a lot of organizations are involved, and they have rigged their businesses based on previous practice. All the contracts that we use are perhaps outdated in one sense, but they're still in use, and they're kind of forcing our hand a lot. So it is a very complex and complicated problem to solve very quickly. I think we have to adopt the attitude of doing this piece by piece and in small steps. And one of the sort of thoughts of having this kind of webinar is to seed some thoughts, and perhaps maybe somebody takes a little bit of this into their next project and does a little bit thing or a few things a little bit different, a little bit more open, a little bit more sharing, a little bit more collaboration, a little bit more empowerment, etc. And that will change things for the better in that project, a little bit in the right direction. And if we all keep doing that, I think we can get to a very good progress.
Thank you. That sounds like a manageable way of everyone starting to get involved in that, rather than thinking you have to make a big leap. It's how do you get started now and work from there.
Yes, and that's also why I think the BCF collaboration for, which is actually part of the OpenCD initiative, but BCF is such a small standard. It's such it doesn't take a lot to start using that, and it has a lot of power in it. IFC is one thing, but BCF you can use without the IFC, and it still works very, very well.
Thank you. So we have a question from Max Andrade. Do you believe that architecture and engineering education needs to incorporate these new concepts into professional training for an effective transformation in the AEC industry? And if yes, how?
I would love to see that. I think that's a very good point. I would love to see some of the sort of experiences and learning points from a more open attitude being shared and thought in our education today. I think that requires that the professors and all the people who are engaged in education see the value of it and has something to share and can start talking about it. So I'm not an educator myself, but I think a lot of the people who are doing all the hard work in education today, if they started to think about this and start to implement some of this, I think that would be great. And I think that it is a really powerful thing if we can do that.
Perfect, thank you. Another question from Robert. In order to implement cooperation and transparency, we have to get rid of the Taylorist view of commanding and controlling managers, the smart ones, and planning the work for those who should be led, who are less able. He says, comically, the latter ones are the ones creating value opposed to the managers.
Yeah, that's a good point. Again, it's difficult to untangle, but I think that's a right sort of way of trying to untangle that a little bit and trying to empower more of the workers and less power. Using the open, transparent tools will automatically sort of empower the workers compared to the managers in a sense.
Thank you. And we have another question. What can be the challenge to have the BCF as standard in a public contract as a first small step in BIM implementation?
So I think the challenge here is for the people responsible for such projects to require it. I think it has to start there. For example, if you're a public institution and you're procuring software that you need to use in your project, you should require support for the BCF format or OpenCD standards. It should be like a natural thing. It shouldn't be any problems at all. And if you start doing that and start requiring that that's the way you communicate in your projects, then that's a big step forward. I think that answered the question. I'm not sure if it was a comment or a question, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. And just while we wait for any final questions, I would like to remind our attendees that we are having a summit in Lillestrøm in Norway from the 18th to the 21st of September. So that's fast approaching. We have online coverage, so if you can't join in person, you can get an online ticket to take part in that event. So do check that out if you can. And Håvard will actually be presenting at the opening keynotes on the 18th of September at 10:40 a.m. So if you want to hear more, do come along to that session. And it looks like that's it for questions, and we've reached time. So I think that's a good time to conclude this session. And thank you from all our attendees to Håvard for your presentation Really brilliant work and great to hear everything you have to say, and we look forward to the future of it all.
Thank you very much. Let's do it together.